Today we're going to talk about context is new code, or what it's all sometimes referred to as the context development lifecycle. Welcome here at the Background Agents Conference. Let me tell you, we all know that we can now prompt if we want to generate some code, and now also recently we have pieces of code that we're just replacing with skills, because the agents are smart enough to drive it and it's a lot less code complexity. I personally like to think in parallels, and in 2009 I was thinking about how ops was more like dev, and now I'm thinking about what if context is actually like code. What does it take? And that made me think about the software development lifecycle become the context development lifecycle. Now, this is a visualization of we're generating context, and then we're distributing context or evaluating context, observing context. Now, the picture kind of goes in multiple directions, and the journey is a little bit different for many people. Sometimes they first care about the generate, then they distribute, sometimes they generate and they observe, sometimes they evaluate. So that's why the arrows are a little bit erratic on this picture. I'm going to take you through the agenda in each of those steps of the life cycle, and then also talk a little bit on the enablement of that. First, generate. We're all generating context all the time, whether that is prompts, and we're like the humans creating a context engine. And that is very powerful and obviously the start of the whole thing. But we learned that we can kind of standardize pieces of this, and we kind of know that we have an agent MD, rules, instructions, a kind of maybe a structured way of our prompts. And luckily, we have a standard in the industry, so we can exchange that between agents. Furthermore, we know that we can get context from other places as well, like our documentation that we have, or other kind of reference documents that we can put in. And we can also connect MCP with our Slack and other pieces where we're creating context that get connected to our agents as well. And one of the new things is actually that we think about this in another structured way, that it's spec-driven development. So we write out the spec, the agent does the planning, and then it breaks down and goes from there. So the specs also are a way of creating kind of context for the agent, what it should do. So that's a very, very fast overview of generate. But what would it take to test these things? Because if we have code, we want to write tests. So if we have context, how do we actually write the test for that as well? So the phase of evaluation, or evals, as they're sometimes referred to. Now, how do you test code? Let's take a simple way. If you have a skill, it has a markdown header, and we can do a little bit of linting of that. We can see whether the structure is correct compared to the syntax that it needed. Is it the line not too long? Does it have the correct fields? Similar to linting of code. And then we can do a syntax check. Was it well written? Was the prose? And I don't have a real equivalent for code, but I think of that as a Grammarly. It helps us write better kind of prompts as well. Now, as a kind of a mechanism, we have evals, and sometimes referred to as a mechanism using LLM as a judge. So imagine you have an endpoint and you want every endpoint to be prefixed by awesome. We could put that in our markdown, and then we can test this, right? The prompt will generate kind of the code, and then at testing, we ask the LLM, what do you think? Was the code actually generated? Did it have the awesome? Now we could use a linter for that as well. But the whole idea is that we can have an agent kind of judge another agent as well. And that brings us then to task evals or unit tests. We write a bunch of those criteria up, and then we run those tests by LLM as a judge. Very simple, very powerful thing to do. Not just for code, but you could use it for infrastructure as code or any other design pieces as well. And then you can combine it with your repo, because that was still kind of just look at your code, but you take that actually with your code itself, and then it becomes almost like an end-to-end test where you execute also pieces of that code to see whether that's still valid in your judgment of the LLM. And now that we're able to test it, we can also kind of do changes and optimize it, and then we can see whether we actually get better results. So we can run an optimizer similar to code actions in the back and we can kind of improve our context as such. So that was evaluate, testing various techniques. A lot of it is LLM as a judge, missing piece for many people who are just kind of getting more rigorous when LLMs change or other pieces change as well. Now, we write these contexts, we test the context, and then we want to push this out, maybe to our colleagues, to other pieces, to kind of other people on the internet. How do we do that? Now, the sad truth is that a lot of people just copy and paste things, or they at least put it in their repo. That's great. But we have a mechanism in coding, which is kind of like libraries. So we can package things and version things and kind of put a lot of more information in that, like similar to a package. And then we can publish these packages to a registry to become discoverable. So think about that next time you're just using a repo to share this. How do you scale this within your whole organization as well? And this is also why you see skills registries or other context registries coming up. Most of them are public pieces, but they're also kind of private registries that you can do in your company as well. And that's important because a lot of the public skills are not vetted, they're not tested well, and you can have like a blessed skills within your company to be used. So luckily, it seems like much like HNMD, we're standardizing on one of those packages. Maybe it's skills, maybe it's plugins, who knows, but there's a standard way of kind of installing and deploying those pieces coming up. And obviously, now that we have packages, we're releasing code, we can do security scans and OpenClaw kind of, with all the skills that he had a whole sprawl of kind of like security injections and so on. So we can now put a security scanner before we publish to any of the registries. That was very brief. Distribute. How do we now make this better? Now, we put everything, we create it, we test it, we distribute it, but how are people using this in the wild? And we have observability for that. So how can we leverage the observability to actually improve our context? Now, one of the ways is actually looking at agents logs. So imagine you have all your coders in your company and you look at all the logs. What if a system just kind of looks at all the pieces where it said, like, what am I missing? Where is that not working? What are you adding all the time that is not yet in the context? So you can learn from those logs very well. And luckily, we now have a standard way of doing this. And then you can also look at any comments in your commits, because that's also context that you can pull in to see what is missing, where you should improve the context. And then you can feed that and back to your create and kind of change some of the context as well. And why only kind of look at it in that cycle? Because you can also look at production code. When the production code executes and you have a direct link to the code and any of the other errors, you can feed that back as logs as well. It's not the agent logs, but it's the application that was created. So we can get context from those pieces as well. And you kind of can think about this as how your internal harness engineering has been tested with a digital twin, with kind of observability, with all the other pieces. But you can apply the same thing actually for context as well, looking and improving context pieces as well. Now, this is all good. This was the very short cycle of improving the whole kind of loop, but there's another side to it. The enablement. How do we actually enable users in your company to do a better job at that? One thing is just to kind of say, here's the tools, improve your context, here's the loop, but we can do better. And I would sometimes refer to this as the human harness. We're helping humans to become better at generating context, at kind of improving their agentic development skills to kind of have the agents perform better pieces. And what's really nice is that for, the first time, at least in my life, I've seen that people write documentation. They write a lot more down than used to do. Documentation used to be a chore, but right now people really, really care about writing things down. It's because that helps them in their job. And that's great because that is actually a new incentive to do it. And if you take this further, if one individual starts writing that down, that's great. If you distribute and your team becomes better, That's even greater. And then the whole company kind of can get better. So that is really a flywheel and amplification of pieces of context within your whole organization. Now, it's a little bit tricky. Who should drive this initiative as the enablement? Is it developer experience? Is it the platform team? I think, on that question, a lot of people just said, like, maybe in the beginning it is one team that kind of sparks it. And then eventually a lot of the distribution, observability tools lands in the platform team, and then the developer experience will kind of enable the teams to do that better. But it's not enough. You can have a solo person writing context. You can share the context over distribution, but you really need multiple humans to kind of harness and make this really better. And that's the multiplayer mode that you should unlock in your organization as well. You can write things down, and there's another talk on this, on compound engineering, where we actually write everything that we learn down so it becomes better in the organization. And now you have to think about, like, how do you enable your teams for context? Do you share the good practices, that they should test things, that they should do distribution to registries and stuff like that? That's some of the enablement work that you can do. And then the context itself probably is also like, are people writing this manually, all the way up to proactive learning context from your logs and improving that as well. And then you also think about how you are actually doing yourself. And kind of, do you still paste the prompts? Do others kind of do that? So individuals can also be measured on how mature they are at doing context. And that brings us to a new metric. A lot of the metrics are all about like productivity and make sure that, people get more PRs and stuff through. But context is a different metric. And I would say it is about how many hops, how many retries does the agent do or need to do to kind of do a better job at things. And I think that's another measurement or lens to look at kind of the improvement of context. But there's a little bit kind of, a counter side to it, like context can drift. Now, the more you use it, the more your agents can see whether that's well, and you give feedback, you kind of limit the drift. But it's a little bit like technical debt. Which direction do you go? Is it a positive thinking? Was it an intentional thing? But it needs love, much like code grooming, it needs love. And then you start also seeing kind of other new practices coming to life. For example, people are tagging their tasks differently. Can it be done by a human? Can it be done by an agent? And usually that means how well they are scoped within kind of the task. Does it have all the right context? Agent can kick off. If it's not, let's have a human discussion about these things. And then people use, similar to a retro at the end of their sprint, do a context retro. What can we do to improve agents and have them do a better job? What do we need to refine? So this is kind of not the code, but kind of actually context as well. That also brings like, who has the final say? Who can say which piece get published as a certain piece of context? And do we also need to care about the ownership? Will we sign those commits and make sure that we can trace them back to certain decisions that were made? So kind of that was in a nutshell, the whole enablement all the way up using the CDLC to make the context better. So I think your mode is to kind of work on this context, and the ones that really do this well will have a competitive advantage right now because it's like a learning organization. And that flywheel is super important to give real power to the whole organization and to make that learning. It's work, I'm not going to lie, but it is definitely the most useful thing you can do for the agent as well right now. So the way that I look at it is that context is the fuel. We talk a lot about coding agents, and yes, they're great as the engine, but context is the fuel. And don't only improve your harness of your coding, but also kind of use the harness of your humans to kind of get better context as well. If you want to hear more about this, Tessel, our company, actually helps in certain pieces of the CADLC, and we also run a conference very related to the subject in June 1st and 2nd in London. So you can visit us there or have a try. And thank you very much. And if you like these slides, just connect on LinkedIn, give me some feedback, and then in exchange, I'll happily send you the slides. Thank you very much.